Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the It's the Pitchers podcast. This is episode 172, and I am your host, Max Colville. Joining me this week is my co host, Evan Green. Hello, Evan.
Hey Max, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. We're a little late starting tonight, but we'll work through it and give the audience a show worth listening to.
Yep, you bet you.
How have you been around your area? Been pretty good.
Yeah, pretty good, pretty good. I don't know if you heard in Massachusetts there was one of those emergency broadcast alerts because our 911 system went down and you had to call the local police instead of 911. That was a little freaky earlier today.
Yeah, I thought to myself, hey, I know that the Celtics won last night, but maybe people need to stop calling 911 so much from the breakouts and the rowdiness. But
Yeah, I
no,
think Shauna joked that it was the purge starting.
oh boy. I certainly hope that is resolved by now, anyways.
I think so.
But we're gonna start a nice heat wave for the next few days where it'll be a good time to stay inside an air conditioned room and watch movies and not go outside and sit in the sun.
Yeah, I agree. How's things by you?
Yeah, that's I was celebrating the Celtics win, Evan. I don't typically watch a lot of sports during the season. Only football do I watch regularly. But
Mm-hmm.
when it comes time for a Boston sports team to reach the playoffs and every stuff, I get involved. So I've been watching the whole playoff run for this Boston Celtics team, and I was very excited to see them win last night and pick up some championship gear today. So
Nice.
I was very eager. I don't think I'll be going to the parade. I say to myself, like, Evan, I went to a parade for the Red Sox last time they won in 2018,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't that fun to go to a parade by yourself. um,
Yeah, I could see that.
like if I was going with like a group of guys or something, and we were gonna go drinking out afterwards, like I'd have a great time. I think like that would be fun to do, and but like just to like drive in Boston traffic for like an hour and a half to get up there to stand and watch a bunch of guys wave at you from a duck boat. I think I can do that at home if I want to.
Mm-hmm.
Celtics championship, but there's news to get to outside of that.
Yeah.
One of the biggest news items of the week was that Sony Pictures has purchased a theater chain. The theater chain in particular is the Alamo Drafthouse. This is news after like I guess 6 Alamo Drafthouse in Texas just abruptly closed because I guess the manager or something had run out of money or the
Mhm.
franchisee had run out of money. And
Yeah, and I thought I had heard that they were on the verge of bankruptcy or something. I'd heard that the business was not doing well.
yeah, which is it's always unfortunate, Evan. We can tie it back to Boston, and they just opened a new Alamo Draft House in Boston in the spot
Mhm.
of another failing movie theater chain.
Yeah. Another
So
defunct theater was replaced by Alamo Drafthouse.
yeah, so I hope that this purchase makes it so that theater can stay there for at least a little while.
Mhm.
I guess Sony it not only likes to have this small theater chain. Let's not think that the Alamo is humongous, but also in their press release they said that they envisioned it was a great usage to maybe push their anime films as they own uh Crunchyroll now fully and really have the corner on the anime market and
Mhm.
yeah, I could see them doing fun stuff with that. I don't know exactly what difference they'll do, but yeah, it's just another avenue. And I guess there was people like really not only shocked but worried about what this would mean that a big theater provider owns their own theater chain. I mean, obviously we saw some of that with Netflix, but Sony is on a whole nother scale theatrically.
Yeah, I mean, I'd read there were a few reasons logistically why it kinda makes sense. One, you mentioned Crunchyroll gives them an opportunity to distribute their anime films in theaters. And, I'm sure you know better than anybody as an anime fan that anime films don't usually get wide releases, and if they do, they're very kind of like limited in scope, in terms of like number of screens they're playing in, number of showings, length of time that they're actually in theaters. So I think this could be a good thing to get more exposure. I'd also read that, Sony doesn't have their own streamer, so they don't have their own, platform. So it makes sense to kind of get a theater chain so they can kind of put their films in theaters. And I heard that they're also just kind of trying to expand more into experiential stuff as well. Um, I'd heard somewhere that they'd opened like a place in Chicago that's kind of like a lot of movie ride type things, and
Hmm.
so I think it's an interesting idea to get into it. And I was watching a TikTok about this guy who was saying, there was the what are they called, the Paramount Accords,
Yeah, yeah.
where basically, movie distribution companies were not allowed movie studios were not allowed to own theaters because it was considered, monopoly, and they could control what was in the theaters. But he had a really interesting point that one of the biggest problems is that movie theater chains get all their money from concessions, and they don't get very much from the movie tickets themselves. A lot of that goes back to the studios. So if you have a studio that owns the chain, then they can bring the price of concessions down because there are all the money is flowing back to them as opposed to, just going to the theater. So it might be interesting to help bring down the price of the movie experience, in terms of
Right.
lowering concessions and lowering ticket prices.
I mean, that would be the optimal result, but I have to imagine that Sony would not do discounted concessions just to get people in the theaters. I think they probably want the extra profit uh, of the pricey concessions and the movies in the theaters. And Evan,
Mhm.
it's just funny. I find myself like, although I love movies and I go to see a lot of movies in theaters, I'm probably the type of person that they really hate going to the movie theaters because often when I go by myself, I don't buy a thing. And I just
Mhm.
go in there, sit down, and watch my movie and then leave. And I get now why they like those big family movies because I'll talk about a little bit later how I went out to see Inside Out 2 with my family on Father's Day, and that you get 3 tickets sold, you gotta buy concessions for the family,
Right.
and
Candy, popcorn, soda, etcetera.
right, so that's where it adds up, and I could see that's why they love these family films being in theaters so much. But yeah, that's Sony purchasing the Alamo Draft House. Evan, I also saw an interesting news. I guess we're celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Blair Witch Project this year,
Mhm.
and that the actors, they've always in the background, I guess, haven't been paid well or noticed very well, especially famously in the marketing campaign. They had to pretend that they were actually dead in order to
Yeah.
sell the movie.
Mhm.
Now they're coming out and saying since the studio wants to reboot Blair Witch Project and presumably like use the names of their characters or maybe even borrow footage from that film, they are still arguing for better wages, and it's a tough spot, right? Because
Mhm.
it's like they wanted to sign the contract. They're like, "Oh, this little small film, and we want to get a break," and then it gets bought, and they're stuck with these really awful contracts.
Yeah, I feel terrible for these people because, like you said, they had to pretend to be dead as part of the marketing for the film, and they use their real names. So technically, the characters are named after them, and so their actual name and likeness and image has been used all this entire time to be marketing these movies. And, they've amassed hundreds of millions of dollars, I think, at this point from this franchise. And it's terrible that these people got cut out of the profits and haven't gotten their fair share. And so I'm totally on their side. I'm glad that they're speaking up about this because it's terrible. Like, you know, they were in a lot of they had issues basically after this where they were like broke, all of them. And I think that's terrible. I think it's terrible that they got screwed out of that money. And so I'm all about them speaking up, and I really hope that they can get some kind of restitution.
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising. I guess in the Variety interview with them, they will go on to say that they were working jobs after the movie came out, and their bosses and stuff would be like asking them, like, "Oh, what? The movie's making millions of dollars. Why are you still here, like sweeping the floors?" And they're like,
Mhm.
"We're not seeing a dime of that." And that's depressing, and it's not unusual in this industry for sure. There's been countless other movies where actors have appeared in the movies and they don't have favorable contracts. Just look at all the actresses who have performed throughout history and with their unfair wages and how they've traditionally gotten paid less than men. And you can see there's lots of wage gaps in Hollywood. And just because you're in a breakout movie doesn't mean you're going to make a lot of money. But on the other
Mhm.
hand, you wish that there was a more equitable system.
Oh, totally. I mean, one of the best examples I can think of is, Barkhad Abdi, who won the Academy Award for being in Captain Phillips. He won the Academy Award for his work. He could not get a higher recognition, and I heard that he was, like, broke after doing that movie and had no money and no job prospects for a while, and I can't believe that. It's terrible.
Yeah, and well, yeah, it's just the way that the industry washes the actors out.
Mhm.
It can be awful, and I hope that like some actors, recent actors, have more ability to stick around or have caught the attention of the public eye to earn. I don't want to say earn, but even like just get the attention. I think of Lily Stone, Gladstone,
Yeah.
and like how
Mhm.
she was nominated for Best Actress. She won the SAG Best Actress award. She was on a new Hulu series, and she has another movie, independent movie, Fancy Dance, coming to Apple TV Plus soon, and
Mhm.
limited run in theaters. And it's just like I hope that she continues to find work because she's a great actress and
She is, yeah.
doesn't get pushed out by the industry machine. But in other movie news, Evan, this is just a funny. I guess it's a funny project or just weird in that we've learned that the MCU Blade movie has lost a second director, and
Yikes.
this project has been long to get off the ground. It's supposed to star two-time Oscar winner Mahershala Ali, and it's just not working working out for this project. I have to wonder if he's going to continue to be attached or if they'll go in an entirely different direction. I don't know how these attachment contracts work, Evan. Whether or not like he has to be available if it's go time, or if they're like, oh well, we finally have something like kind of ready. Can you fit us in your schedule? Because you have to imagine that he's an in-demand actor.
Mhm.
He's very successful and two-time Oscar winner. But I just I don't know. Like I didn't think like we needed a Blade when they announced this, but I wouldn't dislike it, but now it's seeming like it's a lot of work for I don't know what kind of return. Maybe it's making a mountain out of a molehill, but it's certainly a project that has been scrutinized in the media even before getting off the ground.
Yeah, this is a mess from what I've heard, and I'll be surprised at this point if it even makes it to screen. It it reminds me of this book I read a while back called Tales from Development Hell: The Greatest Movies Never Made. It was all about movies that got stuck in development hell and different like versions of movies that you would never ended up seeing and all the reasons, all the behind the scenes reasons why they stalled out. I could easily see this movie joining those ranks at this point.
Yeah, yeah. So something that was a good idea, maybe, but just never came to fruition, and
Mhm.
you'll just be able to dream about what could have been, I guess. And then before we get into our feature, which this week we've decided to look at some of our favorite Pixar movies. Long time ago, John Gilpatrick and I went through the whole list of Pixar movies. This time I've given brevity the victory here and um, gotten an inspiration from a fellow movie podcast called The Big Picture. They were doing a theme called their like Pixar Mount Rushmore, We're gonna do something similar, our Pixar top fours here in a little bit, and share some of our favorites, and then maybe some gems that we like, but didn't quite make our top four.
Mhm.
But before we do that, we're gonna take a quick peek at our summer movie bet. Since we last talked, there's been a few movies that have opened. Of course, we are talking now. Uh, the weekend after Inside Out 2 opened, that was my big number one choice of the year, and it did not disappoint. It
Nope.
had it had a opening weekend of 155 million, and that is considered the second highest opening ever for a animated motion picture. Evan also had his second movie open up, which was Bad Boys Ride or Die. It was his last choice, but it was a good one.
Apparently, yeah.
That franchise has staying power. It pretty much nailed all the metrics that were from the previous movies, and I heard that there's more Will Smith projects being greenlit now because they realize he's not box office poison after the Academy Awards, and everybody's happy. So that worked out. But I think that Evan has a long way to go
Yeah,
because
Max
right
is beating
now,
me by $100,000,000 plus.
yeah. But we still have more things coming. Maxine is coming out very soon.
I'm hoping Deadpool and Wolverine will really pull me out of
Yeah, hopefully it does, and it could be much closer. But we'll see how that goes as the weeks go on. But yeah, here we go. Pixar top four. Evan, you might not know this, but according to the statistics of the It's a Pictures podcast, I think our Pixar episode is like one of the most downloaded episodes. People just
Wow.
love talking about Pixar and Disney movies, and I can't blame them. For a long time, Pixar was just attached to quality. Like you went to a Pixar movie and you were going to be presented with not only an excellent story and what am I thinking of, the newest technology in computer animation, because Pixar always pushes the limit, but you would end up with a wonderful original story,
Yep.
and that was what Pixar was run for a long time. I mean, you had these weird anomalies like the Toy Story sequels, and you know, I guess like maybe it was after Disney bought them, but you started seeing more sequels thrown into the mix. You started seeing
Mhm.
sequels and prequels. You eventually had Finding Dory, which was a sequel to Finding Nemo. You had Monsters University, which was a prequel to Monsters Inc. You
Mhm.
had two additional Cars movies.
Yep.
So,
That weird Lightyear
or
movie that came out,
yes,
what even is
yes,
that?
the most egregious, right? Because
Yeah.
Pixar and Disney thought that that'd be a slam dunk using the Buzz Lightyear character in its own movie, but that was a gross misfire,
Yeah.
and it just didn't end up working out. And the past few years have not been kind to Pixar. The pandemic kind of pushed all their family films out of the theater and into Disney Plus. And that was, it was a tough spot because on one hand, you made audiences realize that they could wait to Disney Plus to see these movies and they didn't have to go to the theater. But on the other hand, you had this great health crisis, and you didn't really want to say, "Oh yeah, take your 5-year-olds to go see a movie during a
Mhm.
global pandemic." So it was a tough spot for Disney and Pixar and the entire animation industry, I think. And they were there was some controversy, Evan, that a lot of these more experimental films or films about characters of color were being pushed to the streaming service, whether it was, the great movie Turning Red or
Mhm.
Luca or what
Soul.
was that? Soul, yeah. Whether or not those movies were pushed straight to streaming services as opposed to really getting their time to shine in a theatrical release. And when it came time for Pixar to do a theatrical release like Lightyear, it failed spectacularly. So this weekend's Inside Out 2 had a lot to prove, and it looks like this was the type of sequel that audiences wanted to see, and they were willing to go out to the theaters to see a Pixar movie once again. So I guess everybody at Disney's probably celebrating. Where Evan and I are going to be talking about some of our favorite Pixar movies. I don't want to necessarily drill on like the bad ones, right? Because that would be no fun.
Mhm.
Um, Evan's already shared his list with me, and we'll get to that shortly. But Evan, I know you and I are old fogies now. What was your first experience with Pixar all the way back at Toy Story?
It was, yeah, I saw Toy Story in the theater, when I was a kid, so that was my first outing, and so, although Toy Story, I'll say, is not in my top 4, I wanted to mention it for being the first because it really was such a groundbreaking movie when we went to go see it, you know? When we were growing up, there was some computer animated stuff going on. It felt very rudimentary, but, we also grew up in the '90s, so we had stuff like Reboot and Beast Wars were CG animated shows that were fairly popular. But this felt like it was taking things to a whole nother level. And in terms of like a great story and really impressive animation and being a kind of groundbreaking film. So I definitely want to mention it for being the kind of ship to launch Pixar into the stratosphere.
Yeah, I think Toy Story 1 is still a spectacular film, and
Hmm.
rightfully so. It's still high on the list of not only because of the story it did, but of the technological leaps it made in storytelling from a computer standpoint. Like you said, we saw some computer animation, certainly even back as 1992. I remember the sweeping ballroom scene in Beauty and the Beast and how that was
Hmm.
created in computers, but nothing quite like Toy Story. It'd be hard to talk about the genesis of Pixar without talking about the ousted head of Pixar, John Lasseter, who he was ousted due to inappropriate behavior with coworkers, but his fingerprints are all over early Pixar and the start of that company, for
Hmm.
better or for worse now. Uh, and you could see it. I mean, like his one of his earlier movies were like it was Brave Little Toaster and stuff like that, and you could see where really the genesis for these ideas. And as the technology grew, Pixar just tried with different things. They didn't go right to like people. Like when you watch Toy Story 1, the people look very uh odd. They weren't great at replicating people yet at that point, or like creating digital avatars of people. If you look at
Hmm.
Andy and Toy Story 1 compared to Andy and Toy Story 3, it's really different.
Yeah, it's
But
striking. And I'm sure, having Steve Jobs in their corner being one of the co-founders of Pixar certainly didn't hurt. Having someone who was, a technology kind of visionary and was always trying to push the envelope and, had a lot of kind of value as like a spokesperson and kind of, putting Pixar out there.
right, no, I agree with you. That certainly didn't hurt, and it certainly made the company more interesting and financially and publicly. For a long time, Disney did not own Pixar, and it was just like Pixar was its own entity of superior animation. So certainly in that era where Disney was like languishing, making awful
Mhm.
animated features in the early 2000s, late 90s, Pixar was certainly beating it at every turn. I think I do believe that the early years for Pixar were the golden years. They had they went from toys to bugs. They did
Mhm.
rats, and they've done all different types of feelings.
Right, yeah,
Fish.
there's that meme, right? What if toys had feelings? What if cars had feelings?
Right. Yeah, that's, like, how they built off that franchise. It wasn't till much later. I mean, like, The Incredibles was really one of the films that, they really focused on humans and showed really what a fantastic, superhero movie could actually be. That
Mhm,
I think it, like, predates, Iron Man and all that, and, it rightfully belongs in the top tier of superhero movies, um, even though it's not based on, like, Marvel or DC. Um
mhm.
But yeah, I think I've loved Pixar for a long time. I've seen many of their films. I think the only ones I really haven't seen as of now are like still haven't seen Cars 2 or 3, and since my child wasn't really interested in Elemental, I haven't caught up with that yet. But um outside of that, I've seen just about every Pixar movie.
Wow. And I'm assuming, your introduction to Pixar was seeing Toy Story?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I remember seeing that in theaters, and I've seen Toy Story so many times now, Evan. I think they did one of those cute re-releases where you could see Toy Story 1 and 2 in 3D when like 3D was like the hotness, and like you'd go to it
Mhm.
and like the only thing 3D about it was really the titles, because like they didn't really. This is like they experimented with like making old films 3D with like these like
Yeah.
trickery, and it just never worked.
No, I
It,
agree. I saw a few of those in theaters. I saw Jurassic Park 3D. I saw Terminator 2 3D. The 3D added absolutely nothing to the
right?
experience.
Yeah, no, I think like there was an argument at the time between like making an intention for 3D where you had things like Hugo and Gravity, which were very much movies that were made with 3D in mind, as opposed to other movies where they would just put like a 3D cover, like a book cover over the movie, and hope that that would get them some more money. But yeah, let's start here. I see on Evan's list that he has one of the same movies I do, and I think that that's a great place to start, giving the movie that won the box office this weekend. We don't necessarily have to go in order, Evan, but
Mhm.
let's both talk about the original Inside Out a bit, and I'll give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about that movie and its history and what you enjoy about it.
Sure. Yeah, so 2015 film. If you don't remember, listeners, this was about a young girl named Riley who moves from the Midwest to San Francisco and all about the emotions in her head: joy, fear, anger, disgust, and sadness. And yeah, it's all about her like trying to deal with moving and all the changes going on and all the different emotions are dealing with all that stuff internally and how it's reflecting her outside world. And yeah, I mean, Max, you spoke to Pixar's history and how long it's been making movies. And, after a string of, I don't even know if we had had Cars 3 by that point, but I feel like we might have, of sequels and things, it kind of felt like Pixar had done it all, you know? And what I thought was really great about Inside Out is that it really felt unique. It felt like a game changer. It was like, well, I thought Pixar had done it all, and then they really surprised me with this movie about emotions and growing up and dealing with all these things and putting it in personifying all these emotions as characters and creating this whole like internal adventure that's going on in this little girl's mind and learning about how joy is important, but sadness is just as important, and all of the different emotions are very tough to kind of wrangle when you're growing up, but they're all vital and they're all a part of you. And so I thought that was just incredibly sweet message and just really well done, really creative, really smart, moving. I am crying just thinking about her imaginary friend Bing Bong, played by Richard Kind, dying again. Oh my god. Woof.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a similar thoughts with you where when you see the concept of this movie, you're like, this is really high concept for a kids movie.
Mhm.
You think like, oh yeah, I'll just it's an animated Pixar movie. I'll take my kid. Maybe they'll have some fun characters to look at, and everybody will have a good time. But and while there's certainly no shortage of fun characters, because you have five different emotions in the first Inside Out movie: fear, disgust, anger, joy, and sadness. Have this really in-depth story about growing up, and from a parent angle, you can get a lot of joy, yeah, and interest in this movie. And I think that was also another strong suit of Pixar's, where families could go to these movies together, and it wouldn't just be, you know, turn off your mind entertainment for the children, but also that they could also speak higher to adults too, so that the adults in the theater could have a good time with the
Mhm.
movie and be excited to see it. And I think that Inside Out really personifies that idea. And it's just really wonderful, all the different places that joy and sadness go inside of in Riley's mind. They go all these different weird places, or they go these spots where like, oh, things that you've forgotten, where they find Bing Bong, like you mentioned. And
Mhm.
um it's just really clever, everything that they put into it. And I think the director of that was Pixar's Pete Docter, who is like one of the heads now at Pixar. And he's certainly in the brain trust, if you will. And I thought that Inside Out has always been a pretty ingenious movie, and it works on multiple layers. It's not just like
Mhm.
this funny, like imaginative movie, but it also can be touching to see how Riley is interacting with her world, and how you know you're gonna grow up. You're not gonna be young forever, and only experience like two emotions. Like, humans become more complicated as they get older, and it's pretty wild.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really great movie. I'm not surprised to see it on your list because it's definitely a standout in their filmography.
Yeah, sure. And okay. Yeah, I definitely really place that really high. I'm glad that you pointed out that like after a string of like sequels and stuff, like Inside Out came out, and it proved that like these original works from Pixar could be still pretty exciting.
Mhm.
For me, I guess one of the ones that I really liked, Andrew Stanton's Finding Nemo.
Finding Nemo's a good one.
And this has always been my favorite Pixar movie, and I think it's probably still my favorite to this day. Although, like, I think it's can be slight in some areas, but maybe that like easygoingness makes me enjoy it more.
Mhm.
I like this adventure where it has Albert Brooks playing Marlin, which is a father clownfish who, after a tragic accident where his spouse and all their children but one are eaten, he becomes like afraid of the outside world, and he
Mhm.
cherishes this one um fish child that he has left, and it's little Nemo, his little bum fin. And Nemo doesn't really understand his father's hesitation to really enjoy life, or push things to the limit. And one day he gets a little too far away from home and gets captured and taken away. And you know, if this wasn't a movie, there's no way that Marlin would find Nemo, because he has to go across the sea pretty much to find him. But
Mhm.
it's uh, that imagination, that joy that we find in this movie that um, really takes it on another level. Of course, you get almost like the history lesson with it, with like, oh, these are all not history, but an aquatics lesson with like all the different sea turtles and jellyfish and all sorts of different animals of the sea. And
Mhm.
I enjoy that. I enjoy, of course, Dory, which is a sensation of the movie. And if once Nemo is in a fish tank in a dentist's office, uh, the characters that he meets there are pretty funny. But no, I think I really like the adventure of this one too. It's like a road movie, but underwater.
Yeah, it
Because
is.
yeah, because Marlin is going from place to place, and he goes to jellyfish. He sees sharks. Yeah, I've always really loved Finding Nemo, and I think it's an easy movie to put on and enjoy. And you've mentioned when I mentioned this one, Evan, that you like this one quite a bit too, right?
I do, yeah, it was definitely circling my top couple of Pixar movies. You're right, it's a very fun adventure. I think it's got a great voice cast, as these movies typically do. I think Ellen DeGeneres is very charming as Dory. It makes sense why they wanted to, do a sequel and have it focus on Dory as a character, because she kinda steals the show. I love the sea turtles in this. I both
Yeah.
love sea turtles as a person, but I also love the sea turtles in this. Funny enough, Andrew Stanton, I guess, was the voice of Crush. That's
Oh,
funny. Um, but yeah, I love the sea turtles, and I love over at Disney at Epcot, they have that area, the Finding Nemo area, where the sea turtle like will come on screen and talk to people in the audience. I always find that really, really funny.
yeah. I
Yeah.
remember going to Epcot and they had like this little aquarium, like Finding Nemo ride, which is cute. But then it like
Mhm.
opens up to like a real aquarium. You're like, oh, this is wild. You're
Yeah.
like, I thought it was just like a little cute ride, but they have a whole aquarium attached to it.
Mhm.
And certainly that movie has had quite an effect on the habitats of clownfish everywhere. I guess apparently clownfish are pretty difficult to take care of,
Yeah, I've
and
heard that.
yeah, and it was a problem after that movie came out that kids just really wanted clownfish, and poor clownfish.
Yeah, I know. I feel bad.
But yeah, Finding Nemo, I think it still holds up. It's funny when my child was younger, um, I think like there's even less peril in like Finding Dory. So if you're looking for uh, a Pixar movie that's like pretty easygoing, that's not like too dark and scary. I mean, obviously you don't get that like scary death sequence at the beginning of the movie that you get in Finding Nemo.
Mhm.
Finding Dory might be a good place to start
Yeah.
as far as families go. Evan, but I'm excited to hear another one of your movies here on your Pixar top four.
Sure. Yeah. Well, you mentioned The Incredibles earlier, so I feel like I definitely wanna talk about it. I think this might be my favorite Pixar movie, just because I feel like it works on so many levels, and funny enough, 2 of my favorite Pixar movies are Brad Bird movies, this being one of them. And, I love that it's a superhero story, but like you mentioned, it's not based on any, like, existing IP characters. They're just completely their own entities, as superheroes. I love this idea that it's a post superhero movie, so it's like superheroes came and they were great and people loved them, and then they all kind of got in trouble, arrested, killed off by the villain we find out in the movie, and so they're outsiders now and people don't like them anymore, and so I think that's a really cool premise for the starting place. I love the art direction, I love the score, I love the action scenes, they're so action-packed and fun. There's a frenetic energy to them that it's just propulsive. The voice acting is great, the characters are fun. Yeah, I don't have enough good things to say about The Incredibles. It's a fun freaking movie. I really enjoy watching it. I love Samuel L. Jackson yelling at his wife, "Honey, where is my super suit?"
Yeah, it's quite a great movie, and certainly superheroes have been done to death since it came out, but it was really original at the time. I mean, you could point to graphic novels which hadn't been adapted into feature films yet, like The Watchmen,
Mhm.
and as counterpoints of like, oh, these are kind of like not superhero save the world stories, or this is like, let's look at superheroes in a different fashion than just like saving the day all the time. And I think that was pretty clever way of approaching the material. And
Mhm.
on top of all that, Evan, like the family of the Incredibles is kind of a spin on the Fantastic Four themselves, right?
Yeah. Mhm. Yep.
Each one of the family members has their own unique special abilities, whether it's like stretching or speed or
Yeah. Invisibility.
right. So yeah, pretty much. If you want to say that, maybe the best Fantastic Four movie that's been released thus far.
Yeah, you might say. Yeah, the fact that it's a family adds a really fun dynamic to it, and then the kids kind of discovering their powers and learning to work together. Everyone learning to work together as a family, the parents learning to kind of embrace the fact that the kids have powers and they can be strong and tough on their own and they can help and they're not just you you shouldn't just be shoved to the side all the time. And there's, I think, a genuine sense of peril in this movie that it's not present in all Pixar movies, but the villain in this feels dangerous and scary in a way that he could kill any of these people. And so that I feel like is another way that this movie gets me. It's very like high tension kind of story.
Right, because there's some movies from Pixar certainly where like, I don't know, let's say even the original Toy Story, the worst thing that's gonna happen is maybe Andy's not gonna see his toys anymore.
Yeah.
um, and sure, it's gonna be devastating for everyone in Andy's room, um, for the toys and everything. But on the scope of things, it's not really uh, that devastating as opposed to something like Incredibles or some of these other movies.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then like years later, Evan, right? They revisit Incredibles and make even a sequel to that. How do you have particular strong feelings of that, or is it just okay?
That was alright. I was kinda underwhelmed by it, to be honest with you. It was fine, but, nothing beats the original.
All right. But one of the movie that I think does beat the original is Toy Story 3,
Ooh,
which I think is the pinnacle of the Toy Story franchise. I,
yeah,
I think that it hits a lot of great notes, and absolutely, if you wanted to end the Toy Story series there, which apparently Pixar and Disney saw money and decided not to,
they should've.
um, Toy Story 3 would have made a perfect capper for the series. Now Andy has gotten older and is going off to college, and he has to part with some of his old toys. And his
Mhm,
intention is that he's going to keep some of his very special ones. They maybe be put in the attic, or they live together out the rest of their days. But they accidentally get put into the donation pile, and they get sent to this uh, daycare. And the daycare is run by a grumpy old teddy bear. Uh, I think his name's Lotso, because
yep,
he was a Lotso love bear, and he has this idea that new toys aren't really welcome there, and they should just go to the younger classes, where this is like a hilarious sequence where I guess a group of really young kids come in and play with these like old child toys and slam them around and beat them up, and you see like Woody being smashed against the wall. You're like, oh god.
mhm,
um uh and actually, if I remember correctly, I think maybe Woody isn't involved at the beginning. I think Woody decides somehow that he has to rescue them, and I think it's Buzz Lightyear and everybody else who's actually in the daycare.
mhm,
And No, I like the sense of the adventure of of the movie, the finality of it. I think they do a great job with expanding the characters even more so. I mean, they don't go too far, but Ken and Barbie have a much bigger role in the third Toy Story than they did in the first two. Of course, I
Yeah.
guess famously Mattel did not want Barbie in the first Toy Story. I think that they were like approached and they declined, and then like once Toy Story started taking off, they're like, "Oh yeah, put us in the movie." And Toy Story 2, they go by like the Barbie section, and that gets like a whole uh, few minutes. And but really in the third, they get a whole lot more. And uh, I don't know. I think that Toy Story 3 is just a very rewarding sequel. I think it had no business being as good as it is, and there's some sequences in there that like you're like, really, they're going this hard.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, you wanna talk about genuine sense of danger. There's one particular scene where everyone feels in such peril that I'm, getting choked up just thinking about it. It makes me cry every time I watch it. I can't even keep talking about it because 'cause I'm gonna start crying, but it is yeah, it is great. I agree with you. It's hands down the best of the franchise. I'm pissed that they decided to do a 4th one, which was not very good because this would have been the perfect conclusion to have Andy kind of pass his toys on to another kid, and at the end, when she's playing with all these toys and they have a new life together, it's just, oh man, it's so sweet and so beautiful.
yeah, it's nice to imagine that as opposed to, officially in canon, there's like this other story that, and like Toy Story 4 can be fun, but it's a big drop off, I think, from the first three movies.
Mhm.
Um,
Yep.
but yeah, that's Toy Story 3. That's I think like if it's hard not to mention a Toy Story when talking about Pixar and its history, but I believe that Toy Story 3 is the best one there.
Agreed.
Evan, you have two more movies. Why don't you tell us about one of them?
Sure. Well, I mentioned Brad Bird earlier, so might as well go to my next Brad Bird movie, Ratatouille. I just think this is such a fun premise for a movie. You have a rat who wants to become a chef. He finds this guy who's like a garbage boy at a restaurant, and he starts showing him how to cook. And I think it's just a fun idea. It's really cute. I think Patton Oswalt is great as Remy, the lead character, and I like all the machinations going on inside the restaurant. The whole idea that this guy is like the illegitimate son of the the restaurant owner, the chef that inspired Remy to want to cook, and all of the things that are going on there with like the food critic, and they make him the ratatouille. It makes him think of his mom's cooking, and yeah, it's a really sweet movie. It has a lot of fun with cooking and food, and saying I love that idea that like the chef is says like anyone can cook, and I think that's a great message for kids to hear, that like you should embrace your passion and go for it and give it a try, and really just put yourself out there. And I love that about this movie.
Yeah, I hope that's what people took away because Evan, I looked it up recently and I'm like, just how long do rats live? And I think like they only live like 2, maybe 3 years. I'm like, there's
Hmm.
no way Remy could have mastered French cuisine in that time. French cuisine takes a long time to learn. But again, we have to, as long as we can suspend our disbelief that a rat has become a successful French chef, then I think we can also suspend our belief on their lifespan.
Yeah.
But yeah, for a long time, this would have been near my top Pixar movies, Evan. I think it's easily in my top 10 as well. It's such a tough movie for Disney to sell, right? Because you're like, oh, a lot of these movies have cute plushes that you can sell,
Hmm.
or like we can make pillowcases and comforter sets and things about them, and like nothing about rats, screams, bedding or towels or plushes. Uh,
It's true, and I kinda like its subversiveness now that you mention it, that it's not really a one that you like you said, you're gonna turn into a merchandise, lots of different merchandise. I love that about it. It's just kind of its own entity, and it's great at doing what it does. I mean, I was just thinking about how Everything Everywhere All at Once kind of parodied it, where they had
yes.
Raccacoonie.
No, and like I think like this was really a clever movie. It's another one of those Pixar movies that I don't know how much really speaks to children. It's really one that like feels like it speaks more to adults because of like what it's going for. But yeah, sure, I'm sure
Mhm,
kids could see like all cute animals and see them getting into mischief and have a good time that way. Um, but no, I find I did find that funny when I thought about this movie and like how Disney's movies kind of exist to like help its theme park to like make rides and stuff. And
mhm.
Ratatouille is kind of like the antithesis of like all that because you're not really going to make a lot of product off of rats. Uh,
Well, I mean, we did have the Rescuers and Rescuers Down Under, so, I mean, like, rodents definitely people like the movie animated movies about rodents, I guess.
Alrighty, and I guess I'll share my fourth one. Evan, I had forgotten, or like at least didn't know where to place it in this list, and um, one that I go back to frequently is Wally, and this one is just really clever with how it begins. You know, famously, it has a
Mhm,
pretty quiet first like 35 minutes where we're just seeing Wally kind of explore this desolate world which has been absolutely destroyed due to, you know, waste and consumerism and big box stores, and
mhm,
this idea that, you know, we're just going to destroy everything that is good, and when we're done destroying it we can just go out into space and throw waste out into space and you know, continue to make waste everywhere and not grow anything again. And it's very it's a hopeful movie because Wally, of course,
yep,
meets this other robot named Eve, and Eve comes down and like is it's Eve's duty is to find if life has grown on Earth again, if it's safe to return, and uh Wally has found this little plant, and that's supposed to like really signify that these humans who have long, you know, created life out in space, whether or not it's over a course of generations, we really don't know how long it's been, and like uh, now it's time to return and try to like fix the Earth. that seems
mhm,
like that seems like a really overwhelming task to do, and certainly one that the humans seem like I guess like you watch the movie and it seems like maybe some of the humans are game for the challenge, but the AI of the ship, talk about AI all in the news, decides that, you know, it's going to try to sabotage the return trip to Earth and just stay the course out in space.
mhm.
And it has a lot of great references to other science fiction movies like 2001: Space Odyssey, and the beginning song is from the musical Hello Dolly, which is what Wally likes to sing, or not sing, but he watches this video of Hello Dolly all the time, which is pretty fun. Evan, do you have a lot of experience with Wally? Wally is the only Pixar movie in the Criterion Collection.
Interesting. I didn't know that. I saw Wall-E in the theater, actually. I think it came out during the summer of 2008. I remember seeing it in the theater around my birthday, actually, funny enough. And I remember really liking it. And It might have been on my list, but it's been so long since I've seen it that didn't feel like I had a good frame of reference, 'cause I may have only seen it, like, in the theater, and I can't remember if I may have seen it, like, one other time, so I kind of felt weird being like, "Yeah, it's one of my favorites," 'cause I'm like, I feel like I haven't seen it recently enough to say so, but I remember enjoying it. I remember thinking it was really cute, it was really sweet, and, yeah, I love this idea of, you know, robots personified, and I mean, Wally, I remember being really cute, so
Yeah,
I
I mean,
remember liking it.
it really doesn't, like, make you feel good though when you're, like, you're done with the movie. I remember, like, oh, if you buy popcorn and drinks and you're like, "Oh, there's not, like, a place to recycle this stuff in a movie theater." They just expect you to, like, oh, increase the landfills and, like, go about your life, and, like, you just watch this animated movie whose whole mission is supposed to be, like, green and let's save the earth and be, stewards for our environment, and, there's kind of like a whiplash between the message of that movie and, going to the theater and buying junk and throwing it into garbage.
Mhm.
But yeah, I really enjoy Wally. I think that was another really big creative swing from Pixar, and I have to say I'm glad that we haven't seen a Wally 2. It's one of the rare Pixar movies that has not been given a prequel or sequel at this point.
That's good, I think. I feel strongly that it's a very great self-contained story, and I don't feel like there's much to go back to.
But Evan, before you shout out your last movie, I want to give special mention to one of the more recent Pixar movies that I really enjoy, and that's Turning Red.
Mhm.
I think like it got really overshadowed or tossed aside because it didn't get that big theatrical release, and it's a really clever movie. It does a great job of showing um, those difficult years of puberty, and that's a theme that's definitely repeated in Inside Out too. It does a really great job of like going into a lot of these hard feelings. Like who would have ever thought that like a Pixar movie would have the guts really to go like, oh yeah, young girls can have these sexual feelings and be attracted, and like we'll show these in a animated Disney movie,
Right.
and um, that was kind of like surprising that they would allow that or like that exist at this point. But I think that Turning Red is just a really enjoyable film.
It is, yeah, I really liked it too, and this was one that was kinda circling my top 4, but you had to pick 4, so it was
Right.
like I liked it, but I felt like there were some, core ones that I felt more attached to.
All right, Evan, let's hear your last one.
Sure. Yeah, my last one is Coco, which, in other ways I felt also was kind of a game changer for Pixar because it was a significant foray into cross-cultural storytelling in ways that they had not done yet before, and so I love that, we've got this very Mexican story and focus on Mexican culture, and, the Miguel, the main character, is transported into the land of the dead, and he goes on this quest, to ultimately, like, make sure that, his grandfather, his great-grandfather, I think, isn't forgotten, and this whole it's like one part adventure, one part kind of like mystery kind of situation, given the whole like Hector, his great-grandfather, was like uh murdered by another guy who took credit for his music and stuff. I just thought that whole element of it was really compelling, and it looks great. It's so vibrant. The animation feels like they took it up, another whole nother level with this in terms of the quality, the style, the color palettes. The musical numbers are great. The main song "Remember Me" is very memorable, of course, it
You
should be.
remember it. I think
And
it won the Oscar for best original song.
yep. And, yeah, I liked that they went in a completely new direction, and I think that probably paved the way for something like Turning Red, which you're just talking about, and it's kind of focus on, Chinese culture, and, I like that as a direction for Pixar to go and to tell these stories that still have the same kind of trademark Pixar story arc, a really interesting arc for the character, but through the lens of other cultures. And so, yeah, I think that's why Coco ended up making my list, because it really stood out for me as, you know, them taking things in a new direction. Just like I mentioned with Inside Out, kind of you think they've done it all, and then they do stuff like, Coco and Inside Out that really surprises you.
Yeah, I think like I'm a little unfair to Coco, Evan. I think like when it came out, I had decided that like I was tired of Disney and Pixar's like dominance as a studio, and like I had
Mhm.
decided to champion a film that was like it was going against instead. And so like I made Coco into a villain that it isn't really. It is a spectacularly animated movie, like you said, and has some great music and this great storyline, like you said, where a guy is stealing credit for music. It's like the the big impetus for a lot of the action in this movie, and that's a pretty cool storyline. And I guess Gail Garcia Bernal is one of the leads, and I've always enjoyed him as an actor, and he does great voice work in this. Yeah, I could see where you really like Coco. I see on your list, Evan, though, you wanted to mention one other film of Pixar's illustrious filmography.
Yeah, I wanted to mention Up as an honorable mention because it's the Pixar movie that holds the record for making me cry during the opening scene. They got me early and Up, as I'm sure they did many people. There's, the scene that's telling the story of the old man's relationship with his wife, and woo boy, is that a devastating opening scene. It really, hits you where it hurts, but I think it speaks to their ability to show and not tell, and to be able to make a really compelling opening sequence that tells you a lot about a character in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, and we would be remiss to talk about Pixar without talking about their illustrious explorations into the short forms as well. For a long time, they'd have their studio create shorts before the animated features, and
Mhm.
it would give the team um, some some ability to flex their skills or get more people work that maybe weren't highlighted particularly by the feature film. And that prologue of Up really feels like it could be its own Pixar short and be separated from the movie. As far as like the movie Up itself, I don't necessarily believe it's as strong as that beginning. It takes
Yeah.
a more like fantastical fun adventure. Yeah, many people when they say that they love Up probably probably think of that first 10 minutes first.
Mhm. Yep.
But yeah, I'll be talking about Inside Out 2 shortly in the what you've been watching section to see if Pixar has returned to form. But before we transition over to that section, Evan, is there anything else you want to add about Pixar? Or I know our top fours here. You enjoyed. You mentioned The Incredibles, Ratatouille, Inside Out, and Coco, and I mentioned Wall-E, Inside Out, Toy Story 3, and Finding Nemo. I think there is a lot of great movies in their filmography, even though some of the sequels leave a little bit to be desired most of the time, without the exception being Toy Story. But overall, I think like a dive into Pixar's filmography has plenty of rewards if you give it a try. Do you have anything to add, Evan?
I don't think so. I mean, they have a strong batting average for sure. Like anybody else, they have movies that are not as good as you mentioned, a lot of them being the sequels, but they still keep telling great stories. And so they're still worth, still worth checking them out. They don't all hit, but the ones that do hit really stick with you.
Alrighty, and as always, if you'd like to contact Evan or I, you can always email us at itsthepictures@gmail.com. You can find us on X at It's the Pick Pod. We're also on Blue Sky. We have uh, presence on Letterboxd, on Instagram. So if you're looking for us anywhere, you can find us there. If you want to find me individually, I can be found on X and Blue Sky at MH Colville. Evan, where can they find you?
Sure. Let's see. So X, Threads, Instagram, Blue Sky. I feel like those are the main ones. Letterboxd. I'm there as Real Recon. That's real as in film reel. And then also you can find me over at Spoiler Piece Theater podcast as well.
All right, awesome, Evan. Last episode we had talked about the Muppet movie, and then I did an insert mentioning the Jim Henson biography that's new to Disney Plus. I haven't had a chance to watch it yet, but I think you watched it for Spoiler Piece. Did you like that?
Oh, I loved it, but
Oh,
I'm
good.
also the target audience. I love the Muppets, I love Jim Henson, so I just kinda gushed a lot about that over on Spoiler Piece, but I really enjoyed the documentary. I don't know how much it had to say that was revelatory about Jim Henson, but it was really cool seeing him and his work and the influence it's had. I think probably the main takeaway was I didn't realize how much he was into experimental filmmaking. And so now I'm kind of really interested to check out his weird experimental films if I can track them down anywhere because they seemed really interesting to me.
Yeah, I'm still kind of excited to watch the documentary. Like I said, I haven't gotten around to it yet, but I had seen some documentaries on like Sesame Street stuff, and
Yep.
I kind of wonder going into this one on Disney Plus, like how much repeat there is because they were trying to tell the genesis of Sesame Street with through um him and see what all that was happening. So we'll see. But
Yeah.
Evan, you watched a few movies here. Let's hear you talk about some of what you've been watching.
Sure. Yeah, I've been on a little bit of a horror kick lately. I saw The First Omen, which I'd heard from a few people was really good, and I have to say it did not disappoint. Uh, Normally not a huge fan of the horror prequels or, the remakes and things like that, but this one did not disappoint. It was creepy and gross and it just gave me chills.
No, that's cool for like a movie that is a studio movie, right? Because I mean, normally you have to go to like these independent features to get like this like really creepy stuff.
Yeah, they do not hold back in this movie. A lot of very creepy visuals and just gross gross stuff in the movie. I was into it. I thought it was beautifully shot, really creepy, really tense, just very well done. So I think if you're a horror fan and B you like The Omen, the original Omen, you will probably enjoy this quite a bit.
Alrighty. What else do you have here?
Two other things I wanted to mention. One, I watched John Carpenter's Christine for the first time, which had been on my list as a John Carpenter fan. And yeah, the movie itself was kind of mediocre in terms of the performances and whatnot, but I really, really liked the cinematography and the camera work, which I thought was just chef's kiss. So well done. So, like, if you haven't seen Christine, I feel like that may be a reason to watch it, even though the story and acting are kind of eh. I
Yeah,
don't think the camera work.
I think I watched that one a few years ago, and like I was like, oh yeah, I guess it's okay. Typically, like I'm a huge fan of Carpenter's movies too. Like I find like he has a filmography that is like fantastic overall. Like I always
Yes.
find myself like really enjoying his movies. So and it's weird because it's like there's obviously people who really know his movies outside of, Halloween and The Thing. Like those would you'd point to as like the movies everyone would know. But
Right.
if you go further down, you can really find some interesting stuff.
Yeah. Some of it works, some of it doesn't work in some of those movies, but yeah, I'm glad I finally checked it out. And one other thing I want to shout out is a show called Cruel Summer, which actually I think originally aired on Freeform. I watched it on Hulu. It has 2 seasons. Highly recommend the first season. Do not recommend the second season. It's a significant drop off in quality, but a few things to note. It takes place during the 90s, which is cool. It takes place over the course of 3 years, and each episode shows the same date over the course of the 3 years. So 1993, 1994, 1995. And seeing where the characters are in all of those situations is just fascinating. And I think it's really well done. The premise is that there is a girl who was kidnapped by this guy, and she's accusing this other girl who became very popular in her absence, became friends with her friends, of she says, "Oh, she knew I was there in this kidnapped guy's house and she didn't tell anybody." And so this other girl becomes the town pariah, and
Yeah.
it's all about them kind of like untangling like what happened, is it true, et cetera, et cetera. And I was a big fan.
Mm, cool. Yeah, I had to watch Presumed Innocent, which is the new Jake Gyllenhaal show for Roger Ebert, and I know like talking to you off air that you had watched some of that, and I really enjoyed what I saw, and not for like
Hmm.
the actual mystery, Evan. I enjoyed it more for like the report between Jake Gyllenhaal and his, I guess, brother-in-law, the Skarsgård over there, who
Hmm.
I liked their sparring and like how they really hate each other as opposed to like the central mystery. And
Hmm.
um if the TV show is anything like the movie and the book, um yeah, I've looked up what actually happens because I didn't want to wait. So I guess in that sense, like it had my attention, and I did want to see it to the end. So I don't know if by the time that finale comes out, if I'll be like, gosh, I need to turn it on to see how it ends. But I enjoyed what I watched of it.
Yeah, I'm certainly clamoring for it. They, a little inside baseball listeners, but to critics, they gave us it's an 8 episode season. They gave us 7 out of 8 episodes, so they did not give us the finale, and I am clamoring for that finale because I really did dig the show and where it was going, even though I'd seen the movie. So it's quite possible that it might be exactly the same result, but it might not be. And so I want to know.
Another thing I've been watching, Evan, is I've seen the first half now of the newest season of Bridgerton.
Ooh.
The missus and I enjoy watching that show. I remember that I pushed it on her originally to watch it because I was like, oh, it's like Jane Austen but with actual sex, and she was like, yeah, that's kind of not what I want to watch. And then like eventually we watched it together, and well, we both enjoy it. She likes it for the intrigue and the romance and what have you, and I don't know. I guess I can't lie that I like it for some of those things too. But it's something that we enjoy watching together, and the first half of the third season now didn't really disappoint. I'm looking forward to watching the second half, although they have like a pivotal like um love sequence, like, and the show, if you haven't seen it before, is like kind of soundtracked to modern songs, and like but transformed into like classical compositions.
Mhm.
So like they'll have stuff from like Billie Eilish or like Coldplay, like kind of turned into like classical music over the show, and it's just like, oh, that's kind of weird, but kind of works. Um,
Nice.
but the sequence here, like they used a Pitbull song, and you're like, I can't help but think this is cringe. But it is what it is. But we've been
Nice.
enjoying that and looking forward to the second half. I did want to share my thoughts on Inside Out 2 since this was the Pixar episode and I did see the
Yeah,
movie.
love to
Um,
hear about it.
yeah, Inside Out 2 picks up, I think, only like 2 or 3 years after Inside Out. Now Riley is 13 years old and she's decided to pick up hockey again. If you remember, that is a big deal in the first Inside Out. That when she's moving, she decides like maybe she might not do hockey again. But yes, she has decided to do hockey once again, and she is with some of her friends that she's made, and they get along great together. And they are moving on to the next school, and she Riley finds out that her two friends are going to a different school because they're in a different district.
Oh,
And she gets very upset about that. And she decides that at this hockey training camp that they're going to for a weekend, that she is going to try desperately to make friends with some of the upperclassmen of the school she's moving into. So she's not a pariah at the new school so that she moves into by herself. And that comes up with a lot of complicated emotions and the mind of Riley. There's an introduction to more emotions as she's facing the troublesome age of puberty, and she's welcomed new emotions like anxiety, who is voiced by Maya Rudolph, no, not Maya Hawke from Stranger Things, and other stuff. And I think it's Envy, who is voiced by Ao Edebiri, best known from The Bear.
nice.
They also have another character called Ennui, which is voiced by Adele. And we'll call her Adele E, most famously from Blue is the Warmest Color.
Nice.
They also have Embarrassment and Nostalgia comes in for a few scenes.
Ooh, nostalgia.
Yeah, but it's pretty funny, and they quickly find out that like anxiety kind of runs Riley's brain, and she decides that she has to kind of take control, and so she does her best to kind of like bottle up uh Riley's emotions of joy, anger, fear, and disgust, and they get sent away. Why? Anxiety's kind of taking control of the wheel. And this is a strange sequel because like I enjoyed this I enjoy these characters and I enjoyed my time in this world again, but it is also like diminishing returns in that like we've been to this really inventive world that before in the first Inside Out. It's like they don't really
Mhm.
go to anywhere that's as exciting or experimental as the first movie.
Oh, that's a bummer.
So I guess in that way, it's just like it feels definitely like a sequel, more of the same, but um, it's still fun to spend time with these characters. And anybody who has been an adolescent or um can face these emotions or knows what these emotions feel like can kind of see themselves in this movie. I know people who who face anxiety more so that very very strongly in their lives felt particularly moved by the premise of this story and how anxiety can like kind of overrun our senses. I overall like I'm on the plus side, but I don't think like it's gonna be my top 10 Pixar's. I guess like Evan, I'd almost do like a tier of like Pixar sequels, not including Toy Story at this point, and just be like try to rank those because
Mhm.
like it's almost unfair to say like because I don't know I like the original ideas that Pixar does and like those first outings more than I enjoy the second outings.
That's fair. So would you still recommend this movie for people to see it,
Oh
or
yeah,
have you
yeah,
kinda
yeah.
come down?
Yeah, absolutely. I also felt that way about Finding Dory, which was like the sequel to like one of my favorite Pixar movies, right?
Mhm.
I don't necessarily feel that Finding Dory is in the same league, but it's a fun time to revisit with those characters and on another adventure, and I that's how I feel very similarly.
Cool. Okay.
Well, if you saying that you enjoyed Inside Out in your top four too, so I think that I'm gonna assume that you'll probably get around to seeing this.
Yeah, I was planning to see it at some point,
Yeah,
so, yeah, of course. Like,
I
give it a try.
I do think you'll enjoy it.
Good. I'm glad.
All right, and that wraps up another episode of the It's the Pictures podcast. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation on Pixar, and if you haven't seen one of the movies that we've mentioned as our favorites, you go out and seek it out and give it a try. I think a majority of them are on Disney Plus anyway, so if you subscribe to that
Mhm.
service, you give them a watch pretty easily. Um, Evan, thanks again for joining me for another episode.
Yeah, of course. Always glad to be here. This is a lot of fun. I'm glad we talked about, our favorite Pixar movies.
Alrighty, well, we'll be back in 2 weeks to talk about something else in the hot months of July. So stay tuned, and we'll talk to you guys later.
See you then.
Bye.